During the earthquake, my wife and her male best friend were hit by stone slabs at the same time. I chose to save her male best friend first without hesitation. At that moment, I could see a trace of panic and disbelief in my wife's eyes. Hi everyone, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share. If you like this story, please let me know in the comment section. I will update the next part. Angela and her boyfriend, Johnson, were trapped under the stone slab. This scene was so familiar. In my previous life, I chose to save her first without hesitation, but in return I got endless pain and betrayal. Now God has given me a chance to do it again, and my choice is no longer the same. William, save Johnson, leave me alone, Angela screamed, with a sense of command in her voice. There was no trace of fear on her face, but she was anxious to fight for another man's chance of survival. In my previous life, I saved her without hesitation, but she tortured me to death. When she dug out my heart, she taunted me with blood on her hands and a hideous face. William, is your heart black or white? Why didn't you save Johnson first? Why can't you save both of us together? You rubbish. Such questions haunted me like a nightmare for a long time. But in this life, I will never make the same mistake again. I looked at Angela and said calmly, "Okay, I'll save him." Angela was obviously stunned when she said this, as if she didn't expect me to agree so readily. Her eyes were full of disbelief, even a little panic, while Johnson showed a hint of joy and immediately shouted, "Quick, pull me out." "Angela, don't worry, I will definitely come back to save you when I get out." I sneered in my heart. His words were so similar to those in the previous life. Even the tone was exactly the same. But this time, I had already seen through his hypocrisy. When Angela heard this, her eyes turned red and she sobbed and comforted him. "Johnson, I'm not afraid, as long as you are okay." Watching the affectionate conversation between the two, I felt more disgusted and sarcastic. In my previous life, she called this disgusting relationship pure friendship and said that I was petty and didn't trust her enough. Now it seems that the two of them just teamed up to take advantage of me. I walked over to Johnson, stretched out my hand, and dragged him out from under the stone slab. He lay weakly on the ground, gasping for breath. Looking at his miserable appearance, a flash of coldness flashed in my eyes, and I raised my hand and punched him hard. He stared with horror, but dared not say a word. "If you don't want to die, shut up," I said coldly. He was indeed silent as a cicada, not even daring to utter a groan. Angela was anxious. "William, how could you hit Johnson? He was just rescued." She struggled to crawl over, but the weight of the stone slab made her unable to move. "Don't worry." I looked at her and said indifferently, "I will save you." As I said that, I walked to her side, pretended to lift a corner of the stone slab with great effort, and dragged her out. The moment she was rescued, she didn't even look at me. Her first reaction was to rush to Johnson. "Johnson, how are you? Are you hurt?" Her anxious tone made me sneer. How could I not see this deep affection in my previous life? "I'm fine, Angela." Johnson responded weakly. The two of them were so affectionate that it hurt my eyes. I turned around, too lazy to watch their performance. Angela emerged in my mind. At that time, she was still a weak and helpless woman, forced by her family to marry a man with domestic violence tendencies. When she escaped from the marriage, she was in a panic and opened my car door, begging me to help her with a pair of tearful eyes. I was so naive at that time that I thought I was doing a good thing by saving her, but I didn't expect that I saved an ungrateful person. I used to be a person who watched the world from a distance and didn't like to meddle in other people's affairs. However, that day, she sat in my passenger seat with tears in her eyes. "Sir, please save me." Her voice was so trembling, with a helpless sadness, as if it had squeezed my heart. I couldn't say no, so I could only nod my head. From that moment on, my life was completely changed. Perhaps this is the price of love at first sight. A man's weakness lies in a woman's tears, and I am willing to be her fool. We got married, but she didn't sever ties with her family as I expected. Instead, her family became even more greedy, and I had to support not only her, but also her group of vampires who were never satisfied. All this made me feel ridiculous and angry. I had given so much for her, but in return, at the critical moment, she wanted to kill me for the so-called true love, Johnson. However, fate is sometimes more cruel than people. Just when she and Johnson were planning to kill me in an accident, an aftershock hit. Angela did not die, but her legs were paralyzed in the rubble, and she became a complete disabled person. Collapse in hospital. In the hospital ward, Her face was as pale as paper. Her eyes were full of disbelief. She beat her unconscious legs frantically, tears streaming down her face, and she shouted heartbreakingly, "I don't believe it. How could I become a paralytic? You are lying to me. You must be lying to me." If it were in my previous life, I might have stepped forward to comfort him out of pity. But in this life, I stood aside, sighed with pretended regret, and said with a bit of sarcasm, "Angela, calm down. How about this? Let me go save Johnson first. Maybe your leg won't be like this." When she heard this, the complex expression on her face almost made me laugh out loud. A trace of regret flashed in her eyes, but she still couldn't help asking, "What about Johnson? How is he?" I curled my lips and said sarcastically, "He's fine. His legs are intact. He can run and jump. He's much better than you." This sentence was like a sharp knife, piercing her heart. I stood there, watching with cold eyes, feeling very happy. There would be no sucker like me in this life. I wanted to see how long her so-called true love with Johnson could last. Mengmu appears. Not long after, Angela's mother received the news and rushed to the hospital. As soon as she entered the room, she put on a face like a wicked mother-in-law and asked me viciously, "William, what happened to Angela? You didn't even take care of her after what happened to her." Before I could say anything, Angela came over crying. "Mom, you're finally here." Her tone was full of dependence and grievance, as if I was the one who was most guilty. I looked at her and could hardly hold back my laughter. Is this the woman I loved to the core in my previous life? She is so easy to fool. She seemed to have completely forgotten that it was her mother who forced her to marry that domestic violence man. Mengmu remained calm. After comforting Angela for a few words, she walked up to me with her handbag and said impatiently, "William, I heard that you bought a large flat. Angela's brother has a girlfriend recently, and her family has high requirements. They want a large flat before they are willing to get married. Anyway, you two are young, and it will be easy to make money in the future, so you can transfer this house to your brother-in-law first." She spoke lightly, as if the house fell from the sky and was not earned through my hard work. At this moment, my mind seemed to be ignited by anger, and regret surged into my heart like a tide. In my previous life, I was so blind that I chose Angela and worshipped the Meng family, a group of stupid and evil people. Angela stood in front of me, arms folded, brows furrowed, her tone full of matter-of-factness. "William, as a brother-in-law, you should have shown some appreciation. It's just a house. How dare you not be willing to give it up? I'm telling you, if you don't transfer the house to my brother today, I will divorce you immediately." Her voice was so powerful, as if it could make me back down. In the past, she would threaten me with divorce every time we quarreled, and I did give in again and again, because at that time, I still regarded her as my beloved wife, and even her words were an imperial decree. But now, she has no idea that I am no longer the William who loved her dearly. I sneered in my heart. Divorce? I've thought about it for a long time, but I don't intend to let this woman take a penny from me again, let alone enrich her bottomless pit of her family. Divorce? Of course. I smiled calmly, but there was a hint of joking in my tone. But as for the house, I really have to show my appreciation. After all, I am your brother-in-law. Let me put it this way, my old house is really too shabby, and it is not up to standard to use it as a new house. I plan to buy a villa for my brother-in-law. What do you think? Angela's eyes lit up when she heard what I said, and Ming's mother was so happy that she couldn't stop smiling. She couldn't wait to flatter me. "Oh, William, I knew our Angela didn't marry the wrong man. You are so generous, much better than that poor guy Johnson. Alas, that kind of person is so poor that he is only worthy of being a doorkeeper for our family." "Mom, stop talking nonsense." Angela interrupted quickly, her tone flustered. "There's nothing innocent between Johnson and me. I've said it before, he's just my best male friend." She said this with confidence, but her evasive eyes betrayed her completely. I couldn't help but sneer in my heart. Sure enough, the more anxious a person is to explain, the more empty he feels. Mengmu realized that she had said something wrong and hurriedly picked up her bag and left, muttering, "I'm going to the supermarket." "Why come to see your daughter?" She was reluctant to bring even a basket of fruit, but was thinking about asking me to pay for a villa for her son. By the evening, Angela was tired and went to bed, and I found someone to investigate her and her so-called male best friend, Johnson. A few hours later, the results of the investigation were delivered to me. The moment I opened the information, I could hardly suppress my anger. It turned out that this so-called male best friend not only had a college romance with Angela, but she even had an abortion for him. At that time, Mingmu asked for a betrothal gift of 500,000 yuan, but Johnson's family was poor and could not afford the money, so the two had to break up. I looked at the information, then at the photo of the two of us kissing, and a sneer of sarcasm appeared on the corner of my mouth. Is this what Angela called innocent? What makes me laugh is that in her previous life, she had firmly told me that she and Johnson were just pure friends, and they had never even held hands. But the evidence before her slapped her in the face. Angela, are you qualified to talk about innocence? When I returned to the ward, I pushed open the door, and the scene that greeted me made me feel sick. Johnson was holding Angela's hand tightly, and the two of them were crying as if they were acting in a tragedy. The sadness and affection on their faces seemed to overflow the ward. Angela, it's all my fault. Johnson looked miserable, his voice full of regret. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't be suffering like this. Angela raised her tear-stained face and responded with red eyes. Johnson, it's not your fault. As long as you are safe, I would be willing to sacrifice not only a pair of legs, but also my life. Her tone was so firm that it seemed as if she was really willing to sacrifice her own life. Angela, you've been so good to me. I swear, no matter what, I will protect you in the future. Even if it costs my life, I will have no complaints. Johnson said this with true feelings, and a few tears squeezed out of the corners of his eyes, which was particularly tear-jerking. I stood at the door, thinking that the drama of this star-crossed couple was too funny. I coughed lightly and pushed the door open. My voice was as cold as ice, instantly breaking the warm atmosphere between them. Since you said you're willing to do anything for her, that's great. I spoke slowly, without a trace of warmth in my tone. Johnson, please settle Angela's medical expenses later, as well as her subsequent treatment expenses, convalescent expenses, and nursing expenses. Please take care of them all at once. Johnson's expression froze instantly, and the affectionate look just now disappeared instantly. He opened his mouth blankly, but couldn't utter a word for a long time. Angela was not happy with this. She frowned and looked dissatisfied with me. William, what do you mean? You clearly know that Johnson's conditions are not good, and it is difficult for him to make money. Why do you still humiliate him like this? Aren't you too heartless? Hearing her say this, I felt chilled. All the efforts I had made for her in the past had resulted in such a result. All the years of love were just a joke in her eyes. Angela, did your brain get damaged by an earthquake, or did your heart get eaten by a dog? I sneered and asked, you feel sorry for others who work hard to make money, but you forgot who your husband is? I'm so busy every day that I don't even have time to breathe. Do you think it's easy for me to make money? As soon as I finished speaking, Johnson immediately stood up with a hypocritical look on his face. Mr. Wynn, don't get me wrong. Angela just thinks I'm not as good at making money as you. As for the medical expenses, I'll find a way to get them together. As these words came out, Angela was immediately moved, with a touch of emotion flashing in her eyes, as if she had seen a savior. Then, she turned her finger at me again, her tone full of reproach. William, you've done enough. Why do you always make things difficult for Johnson? Don't you think you're being too much? I'm going too far? I sneered, my tone full of sarcasm. He's good to you, but I have to pay for him. How can this be called logic? If I were in your shoes, I would be going too far with your double-standard attitude. She heard what I said and gnashed her teeth in anger. If you could be half as kind as Johnson, I would worry less. After she finished speaking, she turned her head and looked at Johnson. Her tone was so gentle that I almost suspected that she had changed into a different person. Johnson, don't listen to him. You don't have to worry about the medical expenses. I am William's wife. He has plenty of money. He should be responsible for the medical expenses. Then, she ordered me like a queen. William, I warn you, if you dare to let Johnson pay a penny for my medical expenses, we will divorce immediately. Even if you kneel on the ground and beg me this time, I will not turn back. Hearing this, a gleam of pride flashed in Johnson's eyes, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly, as if he was sure of victory. But I only had one thought in my mind. Divorce? This is a great thing. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. But it depends on whether I am willing to give him a good deal. In my last life, Angela had her heart dug out by her own hands. I gave everything for her, but was trampled on and left with nothing. In this life, I will certainly not let her go easily. I will get back everything that the Meng family owes me. The next morning, Marlin came to my house impatiently. He had a sharp face and an arrogant expression. Brother-in-law, when will you give me the villa? Don't dilly-dally. My girlfriend is waiting to see the new house. If you delay my marriage, I will tell my sister and let her divorce you." Hearing this, I sneered in my heart. This Ming family is really poisonous. They threaten me with divorce at every turn. Do they really think that I have to have them? I showed a respectful and flattering look and said with a smile, "Don't worry, brother-in-law. Your husband will certainly not delay your important event. This is your wedding day, and I have already prepared a house for you." After that, I took him to see a villa with a market value of 7 million. This house has a great location and luxurious decoration. It is obviously a luxury house that rich people dream of. Marlon's eyes were wide open, and his saliva almost flowed down. "Brother-in-law, is this house really prepared for me by you?" I sighed helplessly. Yeah, it's a pity that the owner insisted on paying all at once. I'm still short of 300,000 yuan for my cash flow. There's really nothing I can do. If I can't get the money together, I'm afraid I won't be able to keep the house. He stamped his feet anxiously after hearing this. "Only 300,000 yuan? Fine, our family will advance the money. But brother-in-law, you have to pay us back quickly. Otherwise my sister will definitely not let you go." "Of course, brother-in-law remembers your great kindness." I looked grateful and nodded repeatedly. Next, I took out a document and asked him to sign it. He hesitated. "Brother-in-law, didn't you give me this house? Why do I need to sign it?" I calmly explained. "Aren't you the owner of the house? Of course you have to sign. Otherwise the property rights cannot be transferred." He signed the document without thinking twice. After all, in the eyes of the Ming family, I am just an obedient ATM machine. I almost laughed out loud when his name was written on the loan document. As for repayment, I really look forward to them working together to pay off the debt. After all, debts must be repaid. Meanwhile, Angela's life was quite leisurely. During this period, she was in a wheelchair and stayed with Johnson almost every day, as if they were good partners who shared weal and woe. At night, I came to the hospital and saw through the glass window that she was leaning on Johnson's shoulder and said affectionately, "Johnson, sometimes I really regret it. It would have been better if I had married you." This sentence almost made me laugh out loud. She continued, "Although William is rich, he doesn't understand me at all and is not worthy of me. Only you are the one who loves me the most. Every time I am sad, only you will accompany me." I just felt it was ridiculous. Accompany her? What could he do to accompany her? Just empty words? During the years of marriage, I used my hard-earned money to support her family, and she transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars to this man. What's more ironic is that in my previous life, I was seriously injured in a car accident, and she was too lazy to even pour me a cup of hot water. On the other hand, Johnson was so anxious about a cold that she was like an ant on a hot pot. At this time, Johnson pretended to blame himself, sighed and said, "Don't say anything, Angela. It's all my fault. If I could have collected the 500,000 yuan betrothal gift your mother wanted, we wouldn't have separated." His words were full of bitterness, which instantly ignited Angela's heartache. "Johnson, don't be like this. This is not your fault. You can't choose your birth. Besides, I like you like this, clean and simple, not like William who is full of money." I leaned against the door, listening with great interest, and I just felt amused. The smell of money? Wasn't she spending it happily? But it didn't matter. Since their love was so strong, it was my turn to help this pair of star-crossed lovers. I heard Angela say, "You stink of money." I sneered in my heart. I worked hard to make money and gave every penny to her family, but she despised me for smelling of money. Since she despised me, I will fulfill her wish in the future and let her not touch a penny of my money. From that day on, I hired a private detective to follow Angela and Johnson. They thought they were hiding well, but they didn't know that their every move was in my sight. The photos and videos were more explosive than the last. Every frame reminded me that this so-called wife had betrayed the marriage long ago. Finally, the detective sent a text message with a simple message. They just checked into the hotel. Looking at this message, I sneered. This time, I didn't plan to catch the adultery myself because that would be too easy for them. I called the police directly and reported it simply. Someone is soliciting prostitution. The police were always efficient and broke into the room quickly. I heard that the two people in the room were naked and had no time to put on clothes before they were taken to the police car. Thinking of that scene, I almost couldn't help laughing out loud. When I received the notification from the police station and rushed over, I saw Angela, disheveled and with messy hair. She was sitting in a wheelchair, looking haggard, and when she saw me, there was a hint of panic in her eyes. "William, this is all a misunderstanding." She spoke hastily, her tone full of pleading. Listen to my explanation. This is really a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I stared at her with cold eyes and a tone full of sarcasm. Male best friend? Didn't you say you two were innocent? Why? Now the best friends are going to bed together? When she heard this, her face turned pale instantly. She moved her lips, but could not say anything. I raised my hand with a sneer and slapped her in the face loudly. Don't say anything, I don't want to hear it. Divorce. Divorce? She was stunned, then pursed her lips, her eyes became cold, and her momentum instantly returned. William, what do you mean? I've already said this is a misunderstanding. As a man, can't you be more generous? Why do you have to make things to this extent? The policeman beside him couldn't help but roll his eyes when he heard this. Catching someone in bed together is still a misunderstanding? You are amazing. I curled my lips and smiled. My tone was terrifyingly calm. Misunderstanding? The police caught you both off the bed on the spot. Could it be that Johnson forced you? Hearing this, Angela's face froze, and she glanced at Johnson beside her in panic. Angela, stop talking nonsense. Johnson was anxious and interrupted her quickly. Don't talk nonsense, really don't talk nonsense. I almost laughed out loud. Of course he was afraid. After all, if it was forced, it would not be a matter of a few days, but 3 years at least. Sure enough, he knew the severity of it better than anyone else. Angela bit her lip and struggled for a few seconds before speaking, her voice so low that it was almost inaudible. It's not forced, I did it voluntarily. At this point, she raised her head, tears welling up in her eyes. But William, you have to listen to my explanation. Things are not what you think. I really didn't mean it. We just drank too much and got confused for a moment. I sneered and was about to speak, but she took the lead, with a hint of pleading in her tone. You know, my legs are already like this. I am already a useless person. I am really sad. Please don't bother me so much, okay? She looked so pitiful, as if all the mistakes were someone else's fault, and she herself was just an innocent victim. I stared at her, and a mocking smile slowly rose at the corner of my mouth. Care? Angela, you reminded me. Over the years, when you transferred my money to him to spend, did you care? When you asked me to support your whole family, did you care? When you were in trouble, you didn't let me drink hot water, and when he was sick, you were like an ant on the hot pot. Did you care? Angela sat in a wheelchair, tears streaming down her face. She looked so pitiful, as if she had been abandoned by the world. But I was the only one who knew that behind this perfectly disguised face was a vicious woman who could make me die without a complete corpse. In my previous life, I was killed by her own hands. Her tears? Sorry, I am not moved at all. My eyes gradually turned cold, and a mocking smile appeared at the corner of my mouth. Angela, your legs are like this, isn't it your own fault? My voice was neither hurried nor slow, but it pierced her heart like a sharp knife. You asked me to save Johnson first. At that time, you would rather die than let me save your so-called male best friend. It's a pity. If it weren't for your ridiculous choice, your legs wouldn't be like this today. Her face suddenly turned ugly. Her lips trembled slightly, but she couldn't say a word. Maybe she was still trying to explain, but no matter what she said, I would never believe it again. I didn't bail her out, but pretended to be disappointed and left the police station. When I got home, I didn't waste a moment and directly told the nanny to throw out all of Angela's clothes and belongings. The nanny was stunned for a moment, then asked cautiously, Sir, if all these things are thrown away, what will we do when Madam comes back? I raised my head coldly, my tone as cold as ice. She is no longer qualified to step into this house. After dealing with these, I walked into the study and saw our wedding photos on the table. Those smiles seemed so hypocritical and ironic at this moment. I took the photo out of the frame, lit it, and watched it turn into ashes. I felt relieved. In the end, Angela was bailed out by her family. However, this incident did not make them reflect, but made Ming's mother furious. She had always looked down on Johnson, and now she was furious to learn that her golden rice bowl son-in-law wanted to divorce Angela because of the affair. In order to save the situation, the Ming family decided to bring Angela to apologize in person. Unfortunately, they thought I would be soft-hearted, but they didn't know that this time they couldn't even enter the house. I had changed the door lock long ago. At the door, Angela was so angry that her face turned blue, and she called me. After the call was connected, her voice was still so arrogant. William, what do you mean? Why did you change the lock for no reason? Are you trying to humiliate me? She yelled at me in her usual commanding tone. Come back and open the door. Otherwise, I will never let it go. Hearing her still arrogant attitude, I sneered and said nothing. At this time, a nasty voice came from the other end of the phone. Marlon, this brainless guy, answered the phone. Sister, don't be angry. Let me talk to him. Marlon's voice was full of disdain. Hey, William, who do you think you are? If things really don't work out, just divorce my sister. When the time comes, my parents and I will definitely find someone richer than you for my sister. Believe it or not. Laughed out loud when I heard this arrogant statement. Marlon, I'm looking forward to whether you can still laugh so happily when you find out that you have a mortgage of $6.7 million. I was too lazy to waste time, so I said in a cold and decisive tone, Angela, I told you I want to divorce you. My assistant has sent the divorce agreement to your hospital. Please take a good look at it. As soon as I finished speaking, I hung up the phone without giving her a chance to speak again. In my last life, I gave my heart to her, but in the end, I got a heart dug out of it. In this life, my love for her has long been trampled to pieces along with that heart. As for the Meng family, their so-called calculations and complacency will soon pay the price. In the evening, after the divorce agreement was delivered to Angela, my phone was immediately bombarded with calls and text messages. William, what do you mean? Do you still have a conscience? I've been with you for so many years, and you treat me like this. You want to divorce me just because of such a small matter? And you want me to leave the house with nothing? My legs are like this now. Are you so heartless that you want to force me to die? Looking at the messages popping up one after another on the screen, I could almost imagine Angela on the other end of the phone, furious and crying. A sneer of irony appeared on the corner of my mouth. I moved my fingers and replied to a text message. Heartless? Angela, don't forget why your legs became like this. Wasn't it to save your male best friend, Johnson? You should hold him responsible. Less than 2 minutes after the message was sent, her reply popped up again. That's enough, William. Stop pretending to be so dignified here. You just despise my crippled legs and want to take this opportunity to dump me without spending a penny. I really regret it. How could I have been so blind to fall for a cold-blooded person like you? The last message made me stunned. Looking at the lines of text on the screen, my fingertips paused for a moment. Then I sneered and replied with a short sentence. I regret it too. After I sent this message, Angela's message never popped up again. The whole night became strangely quiet, and I could even imagine her going crazy and throwing things. She obviously didn't want a divorce, or more accurately, she didn't want to leave the house. However, at this point, it was not her turn to make the decision. I filed a divorce application with the court and submitted the records of her and Marlon checking in at a hotel, as well as the ambiguous photos and videos between them, as evidence. The court's decision came down quickly. Divorce, and Angela was kicked out of the house. Angela in a wheelchair like crazy and rushed to my company to make a scene. They smashed things and shouted at me to give an explanation. I had seen a lot of these farces in my previous life, and I'd already figured out the character of the Meng family. So when they broke my office items and vases, I immediately took out my cell phone and called the police. When the police arrived, the Meng family was still shameless and making a scene. Especially Angela. She was pale, sitting in a wheelchair, and looked pitiful, saying, I have been let down by the whole world. When she saw me, she immediately asked in a hoarse voice, William, how could you do this to me? Was all the love you told me before fake? Her tears were rolling down her cheeks, and she looked so miserable. However, I just found it funny, and a sneer appeared on the corner of my mouth. Love! I sneered, my eyes as cold as a knife. Do you deserve it? This sentence hit her heart like a heavy punch. Angela's face turned pale instantly, as if all her strength had been drained away. She opened her mouth, as if she wanted to argue something. Johnson, who was following behind her, suddenly fell to his knees with a plop, choking and shouting, Bosswoman, I beg you, don't say these words anymore. Angela is already pitiful enough. Her legs are broken, and she can only sit in a wheelchair in the future. As he spoke, he bowed his head and kowtowed, his voice choked with sobs and sounded like crying. If you really want to hate someone, then hate me. I am the one who has let you down. I beg you to let Angela go. She has suffered so much. Johnson. Angela burst into tears instantly. Seeing him kneeling on the ground, her eyes were full of emotion. I know that you are the only one who truly loves me. Get up quickly, don't kneel to this scumbag. She turned to look at me, her eyes full of hatred. William, you are despicable. I curse you to die miserably. Seeing her like a victim made me feel sick. It was such a bloody drama of great love. I sneered, crossed my arms, and looked at her indifferently. Angela, I really want to thank you and your good male best friend. If you hadn't made me go through this, I really wouldn't have seen what kind of person you are." Johnson, who was still kneeling on the ground, and said with a hint of sarcasm, "As for you, don't make yourself sound so great. Angela cheated on me with you while I was married, and she even risked her life to save you. Her legs were broken because of you. To be honest, you are the one who should be most responsible for her affairs, aren't you?" Johnson was stunned, his face flushed red, unable to utter a word. Angela, on the other hand, was stunned by my words. The family, who had been so aggressive, now looked like a completely failed clown show in a state of disgrace. The people in the office originally looked at Angela and Johnson with some pity, but after hearing my cold words, their eyes gradually changed from the initial sympathy to undisguised contempt. The scene was enough for this, so I called the police directly. In less than 10 minutes, the police arrived and took all the Meng family members to the police station. When I got to the police station, I took out the appraisal certificate of the smashed antique vase, which clearly stated its value, 1 million. This time, the Meng family members turned green. Marlon jumped up on the spot and angrily accused me of blackmail. "Stop talking nonsense. A broken vase is worth 1 million? Do you think I'm a 3-year-old child?" I was too lazy to pay attention to his mindless rant and just handed the receipt of the vase purchase through a formal channel to the police and attached the complete surveillance video. The video clearly showed that before he smashed the vase, my assistant had reminded him that it was worth a lot of money. But he not only didn't care, but also deliberately smashed it. In the final analysis, it was all because of my tolerance over the years that the Meng family became unscrupulous and felt they could trample on me at will. But this time, I will not compromise. I have prepared the lawyer's letter. If you can't pay the compensation, just wait for the court to handle it," I said coldly and turned to leave. Marlon was so angry that he was shaking all over. He pointed at me and threatened, "William, are you still a human being? Even if I smashed your vase, would you do this? I tell you, if you really send me to jail, my sister will never forgive you." I couldn't help laughing when I heard that and glanced at him coldly. "No forgiveness? Do you think I care?" Seeing his stunned look, my smile deepened. The Meng family would never have thought that after my rebirth. I was no longer the good guy who was led by Angela. Now I just want this stupid woman and her equally stupid family to suffer the consequences. Angela in the wheelchair suddenly spoke up with a pleading tone in her voice. "William, don't be like this. I admit that I slept with Johnson, but I still love you. Can you please stop making such a fuss?" I was stunned for a moment when I heard her say this, and then I laughed out loud. This time, I laughed without hiding it. Even the sarcasm was written on my face. "Love me? Angela, do you think there is anything about you that is worthy of my love now?" My eyes slowly swept over her legs. The mockery in them was self-evident. Angela's hands subconsciously pressed down her legs. Her face was stiff and awkward. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she gritted her teeth and refused to let them fall. Seeing her like this, the chill in my heart grew stronger. I knew that my goal had been achieved. I took another look at this woman who had made me give everything. And then I turned and left the police station with a faint smile on my face. I want to see this time, when she finds out that she has become a disabled person in order to save Johnson, can she still have no complaints towards this male best friend like she did in her previous life? Soon, Marlon was detained according to law for damaging valuable property. The Meng family realized the seriousness of the situation and panicked. They originally thought that they could persuade me to release him by talking, but this time I did not give them a chance to bargain. Seeing their only darling son imprisoned, the Meng family was at a loss and came up with another plan. They set their sights on the villa I bought for Marlon. The market value of this villa is 7 million. The Meng family thought that even if they sold it, they could still make a net profit of more than 6 million, which was enough for their family to continue to live a life without worries about food and clothing. However, when they were ready to sell the house with a property certificate, they found out a shocking piece of bad news. The $300,000 that Marlon had borrowed from them was just a deposit for the house. The entire property actually still had a loan of up to $6.7 million. This means that not only will the Meng family not be able to get a penny from the villa, but they will also have to repay a monthly mortgage of more than 100,000 yuan for the house. The truth made them completely devastated. But at this time, Marlon's rich girlfriend had already dumped him and married a richer man. When the Meng family discovered the truth, their parents collapsed instantly, but they had to save their only precious son who was trapped in prison. Angela came to me alone, staggering in a wheelchair. Her eyes were tearful, as if she was about to cry at any moment. In the past, I could not resist such an expression, but now I just think it is extremely funny. William, you've ruined my family. Isn't that enough? She choked and spoke with a hint of humility in her voice. I beg you to let my brother go. As long as you let him go, I can do anything for you. You don't like Johnson. I will never meet him again. Her words made me laugh so hard that tears almost came out. Angela, I looked at her coldly, my tone full of sarcasm. Do you think you are worthy of me now? She was stunned, then stared at me intently, tears welling up in her eyes. Is it because of my legs? Do you dislike me because I've become like this? Her tears dripped onto her unconscious legs, the legs that once made me feel so distressed, but now I just felt ironic. In the past, I might have hugged her and comforted her with heartache, but now I am no longer the fool who is willing to give everything for her. I didn't answer, but just raised my hand to signal someone to kick her out. Angela was pushed out of the door by the security guard. She still stared at me with hatred in her eyes. She shouted desperately, William, you will regret being so cruel to me. When the time comes, even if you kneel in front of me, I will not forgive you. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, shaking a glass of red wine in my hand, looking at her embarrassed appearance after being thrown out by the security guard, with a sneer on my lips. Heartless? I asked myself softly, sneered and took a sip of red wine. Angela thought her pain was over now. Unfortunately, it was just the beginning. After a while, I found Angela and Johnson appeared on the internet. They uploaded a video in which Johnson, with gentle eyes, patiently accompanied Angela in the wheelchair to do rehabilitation and encouraged her to stand up again. All of this looks like a fairy tale love story, and they quickly gained praise and support from a large number of netizens. Then, Angela started telling her story on her social media account. She twisted me into a selfish and heartless ex-husband, and even gave herself the halo of an innocent victim. I knew it was wrong for me to be with Johnson, she said pitifully, but after my legs were injured, William didn't even look at me. He despised me for being a disabled person and told me, disabled people don't deserve to be loved. She paused, tears welling up in her eyes. During that time, I felt so cold in his house that I even wanted to commit suicide several times. If Johnson hadn't stopped me time and time again, I might have given up. Netizens were moved to tears by her words and flocked to my social media platforms to criticize me. They insulted me as cold-blooded and heartless, and someone even photoshopped a photo of me and circulated it widely. Not only that, but my company was also severely affected, with its stock price plummeting and negative comments flooding in. Angela, taking advantage of the public opinion, launched a donation campaign on social media. While accusing me of forcing her brother to go to jail, she sought sympathy and hoped that netizens would help her collect the compensation. A few weeks later, Angela finally raised enough compensation to rescue her baby brother Marlon. That day, she sat in a wheelchair and looked down at me like a winner. William, I told you that you will regret it, she said coldly, her tone full of complacency. Now, even if you regret it, don't even think about coming back to me. When I heard this, I almost couldn't help laughing out loud. Her narcissism seems ridiculous to me. Why didn't I realize in my previous life that she could feel so good about herself? I looked at her with a playful look and shook my head gently. Angela, have you forgotten that I am the man who sent your brother to prison? Do you think I will love you? Johnson put his hand on the armrest of Angela's wheelchair, and his gesture was so intimate that it seemed as if he was claiming his sovereignty. He looked at me with a smug look on his face and raised the corner of his mouth provocatively. Mr. Wynn, in the end, I still have to thank you. It was because you missed Angela that I could have such a good woman. Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. There was a deep chill in that laugh, like the cold wind on a winter night. Johnson, you're wrong. What happened between me and Angela wasn't amiss. It's that I didn't want her at all. I slowly approached him, looked down at that smug face, and added coldly, to be honest, I feel sorry for you. In the eyes of the Ming family, you were just the only one who was willing to pick her up when she was abandoned by me and her legs were broken, and she couldn't be sold at a good price. This sentence was like a sharp knife, piercing his self-esteem. The smug smile on his face froze, replaced by anger and embarrassment that was difficult to conceal. Angela, who was sitting in a wheelchair, turned pale, her lips trembling, but she couldn't speak. I didn't stop, and my tone was calm, as if I had accidentally dropped a bombshell. By the way, I heard that you two broke up because you couldn't afford the 500,000 yuan betrothal gift. Now, are you ready for the betrothal gift? Johnson's eyes flashed panic, and Angela's eyes, which were filled with tears just now, suddenly dimmed. She tightly grasped the armrest of the wheelchair, trying to save something. "William, is this why you choose to treat me like this?" She asked with tears in her eyes, as if she had suffered a lot of injustice. "But I tell you, those things are in the past." I looked at her coldly, but the image of her ferocious expression in my previous life when she wanted to kill me emerged in my mind. "The past," I sneered. My eyes were cold. "Angela, you now have nothing to do with me. I don't care about what you say." After saying that, I turned and left without looking back. After returning to the company, I immediately arranged for the team to produce all the evidence and launch a counterattack against the public opinion on the internet. These days, the reason why I let the public opinion ferment is just to let Angela and Johnson climb higher. Because the higher they climb, the more painful it will be when they fall. Soon, an ambiguous video shot before the earthquake was uploaded to the internet. In the video, Angela and Johnson were kissing in a public place, and their actions were intimate. Netizens were completely blown away. I shot this video a long time ago. At that time, I still loved her and naively wanted to give her another chance. Now this video has become my weapon. Then I showed Angela's hospital bills, which clearly showed that all her medical expenses were paid by her heartless and ungrateful ex-husband. That is me. However, her so-called loyal and righteous male best friend did not pay a penny. Finally, I showed the property certificate of the house where the Meng family currently lived, which clearly had my name on it. Facts speak louder than words, and my actions completely reversed public opinion. An outcry soon broke out on the internet, and the comment section was full of indignation. Is this the so-called innocent male bestie? They even kissed in the video. It turns out that my values were wrong. Now a kiss between a man and a woman can still be considered innocent. I thought Mr. Wynn was a scumbag, but he turned out to be a victim of cheating. I feel so sorry for him. Bah! This couple, it's okay to have an affair, but they even made up a story to trick us into donating? Give us back our money. Yes, give us back our money. We don't want to see this extremely hypocritical couple anymore. As public opinion turned, Angela and Johnson became the target of public criticism. Refund requests from donation platforms poured in like snowflakes, and their fabricated fairy love became a joke among netizens. Angela and Johnson, who were once in high spirits, into rats crossing the street. Those netizens who once sympathized with them now wanted to nail this hypocritical fairy couple to the pillar of shame. Taking advantage of this wave of enthusiasm, I contacted a professional house-taking team and ruthlessly kicked the Meng family out of my house. After years of debt and public condemnation, the Meng family's life had already become difficult. Within a few days, the Meng family came to my house with Angela. They changed their previous arrogance and domineering behavior. They all looked sad and begged me humbly, hoping that I would give them a way out because of the past relationship between Angela and me. Angela for many days, and I hardly recognized her. Her head was wrapped in a thick layer of gauze, her face was pale, and her breathing was weak. I later heard that an extreme fan hit her forehead with a stone. If she hadn't been sent to the hospital in time, she might not have survived. She sat in a wheelchair. Although she was weak, her eyes stared at me fiercely, revealing a strong hatred that reminded me of my previous life. At this moment, she spoke, her voice hoarse but full of strong reluctance. "William, don't be so proud. Even if I am poor and destitute in this life, I have Johnson. He will always be by my side and will never leave me." This sentence made me slightly stunned. My mind turned quickly, and then I raised the corners of my lips and revealed a meaningful smile. "Really? Then I'll wait and see." This sentence failed to dispel her hatred, but made her face more resentful. I have already vaguely confirmed in my heart that Angela, like me, has been reborn. Under the attack of public opinion, the Meng family could no longer stay in City A. Carrying a huge debt and still unable to change their lazy habits, they would only sink deeper and deeper. Meanwhile, Angela was in dire straits. She was financially strapped and unable to pay for expensive rehabilitation. She could only sit in a wheelchair every day, unable to take care of herself, and needed help from others for eating, drinking, and going to the bathroom. She was once so proud, but now she has completely become a useless person. At first, Johnson reluctantly accompanied her and helped her with her daily chores. But he was a selfish person. How could he really endure such a life? After just a few days, his patience had been worn out. One day, Angela needed help moving her wheelchair, but Johnson was sitting on the sofa looking at his phone and ignored her. She called him softly a few times, but he didn't respond, so she couldn't help but beg. Johnson, please help me. I really need you. You said you would always be with me, right? However, Johnson did not show any mercy. Instead, he stood up and kicked the wheelchair hard. Get out. Look at the mess you are in now. You're dragging me around all the time. I'm not a fool. Angela was stunned. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she cried heartbreakingly. Johnson, how could you do this to me? I really love you. Johnson sneered after hearing this, his eyes full of contempt. Love me? Do you know why I am willing to be with you? I didn't have money before, and I couldn't afford the 500,000 yuan betrothal gift your parents wanted. I suffered so much contempt and humiliation. Now your legs are broken, and you are dragging me like a waste. Do you think I still owe you? Angela's heart like a knife. She stared at him in disbelief, her lips trembling, and she couldn't speak for a long time. Johnson sneered. Now don't think that I will support your Meng family and a useless woman like you. When he mentioned the past, his face was full of hatred. In fact, he had never forgotten the humiliation and contempt the Meng family had inflicted on him. It was just that he was willing to endure it in the past because he could still extract some benefits from Angela. Now that Angela had become a burden, he naturally had no interest in pretending anymore. But my legs became like this because I was trying to save you. Angela almost screamed, her tone full of resentment. If it weren't for me, you would have died long ago. How could you do this to me? Johnson waved his hands impatiently, his voice as cold as a knife. You wanted to save me, I didn't beg you to. You deserve it. He looked at the crazy Angela in front of him, his eyes full of disgust. Not long after, the people I sent to keep an eye on the Meng family brought back news. After Johnson left, Angela's parents and brother sold her to customers with special fetishes for money, regardless of her physical disability. When I heard the news, I felt very complicated. In my previous life, I was devoted to her, even at the cost of my life, but she treated me as a pawn and cruelly killed me, and she never stopped using those whom she regarded as her closest relatives. Johnson, her so-called true love, is now cold and ruthless, more fragile than tofu. Today, Angela has fallen to this state. Perhaps it is just retribution. These things gradually faded from my life. I put all my energy into my career, replanned the market layout, and made the company bigger and bigger. I finally realized that in my previous life, I was so focused on Angela that I missed a lot of interesting things. Now, I just want to enjoy this reborn life. Sometime later, I heard about Angela again on the news, a shocking mass murder case. Angela was reborn. She was sold to customers with special fetishes again and again by the Meng family, and finally her spirit collapsed. One night, she put rat poison in the food and poisoned her parents and brother to death. But after killing the Meng family, she did not stop there. Instead, she was like a wild beast who had lost her mind, obsessed with her so-called true love. She went through hardships and found Johnson his hometown by begging. However, when she finally found Johnson, she discovered that he was holding a wedding and the bride was not her at all. Johnson was standing at the wedding scene, smiling, immersed in the happiness of being with the newlyweds. Angela sat slumped in a wheelchair, her eyes empty, as if the whole world had collapsed. She had given up everything for him, even her legs, but he had already forgotten her. Late at night, anger and resentment completely devoured her. Angela ambushed outside the bridal chamber, waited for the drunk Johnson to return to the room, and then slashed him crazily with a kitchen knife. She stabbed him more than 20 times, and when the Ying family arrived, Johnson was no longer recognizable as a human being. Eventually, Angela was arrested by the police. She showed no remorse in court, admitted all her crimes, and was sentenced to death. When I heard the news, my heart seemed to be relieved of a heavy burden. It was as if all the entanglements, pain, and hatred in my previous life had disappeared with Angela's demise. I stood in front of the office window, looking at the sunshine outside, and felt that my whole life was suddenly enlightened. Before Angela was executed, I received a letter from the prison. I opened the envelope and found only a piece of paper with 3 words on it. Sorry da. I looked at these 3 words with a sneer on my face. I took out my lighter and pressed it lightly. The flame instantly engulfed the letter. As the flame flickered, it seemed to burn Angela's belated regret into ashes. After my rebirth, I finally understood that a woman like Angela, who was greedy and vicious, could never deserve anyone's sincerity. Her ending was her own fault. After dealing with the aftermath of the Meng family and Angela, I devoted myself to my business and soon expanded the company's market share further into overseas markets. My name began to appear frequently in business headlines. With success came the favor of countless investors and partners. I built my own business empire, and everyone knew that William S. decisions were never wrong. But in my heart, there is still an unsolved mystery that is the original rebirth. I've been thinking, is this a coincidence or some kind of opportunity? If it is the latter, can this opportunity be unlocked or triggered again? Once when I was attending an international summit, I met a mysterious guest, a psychologist and metaphysical researcher named William. His words aroused my interest. Human emotions and obsessions are the most powerful forces in the universe. They can determine a person's fate and even affect the flow of time and space. Hearing this, my heartstrings were plucked, and I couldn't help but chat with him for a few more words. William said, "If you really experience the reverse flow of time, it must be because of the unresolved resentment in your heart. Once the unresolved knot in your heart is resolved, your fate will be completely different. So, will my destiny be affected by it now?" I asked subconsciously. William smiled meaningfully. Destiny can be controlled, but only by letting go can you be completely reborn. Let it go. I frowned slightly, feeling a little dissatisfied. While I was searching for the truth about rebirth and expanding my business, my life also underwent some new changes. My company welcomed a new executive named Vivian. She is a smart and courageous woman with excellent business acumen. She brought several high-value projects to the company in just a few months. At first, I just admired her ability, but slowly, I began to notice that she seemed to have a unique influence on my life. Once, after we finished discussing an important cooperation project, Vivian suddenly asked me, "Mr. Nguyen, you always give people a sense of indifference. Is there anything that is truly important to you?" I was stunned, and then asked, "What is really important?" She smiled slightly. "It may be something or someone that you feel is worth spending time and energy to protect." This sentence stirred ripples in my heart. I once thought that Angela was the one who was worth protecting, but later I found out that it was just my wishful thinking. Now, my career and my company are my only achievements and protection goals. But is this really all I want? Perhaps my rebirth is not just for revenge. Perhaps its true meaning is to let me find a life goal that can make me feel complete. But can I still believe in love? I don't know.